Jeff Carlson, God bless it. You're back.
Good to see you, sir.
Good to see you too. Listen, last time you came in, we had a really broad conversation about the advancing ed tech world and what the appropriate relationship is in functioning with that. And one of the big, when we talk about ed tech, I think a lot of people go to education apps. They go to Chromebooks getting passed out. They go to, my second grader used to watch Odd Squad on his school administered Chromebook in second grade while my wife and I were like volunteering for art class, and we would see him, because we could see him because we were there. And, that's a large part of what ed tech, the concept of ed tech, how that dominates kind of our headspace. But there's a lot of ed tech that is technology being implemented and kind of unleashed onto education systems, not necessarily in the classroom, that can bring a lot of clarity to funding, to curriculum success, to all these different things like, okay, how successful was the CTE?
Yeah.
What's the ROI with these types of curriculum emphasis? Or are we giving too much or too little auxiliary funding to, outside sources or opportunities? You're working in this space as well. Talk to me about some of the advances that other states are implementing with ed tech on a system-wide level that we could bring to Idaho.
Yeah, so I think you're right. People, when they think about ed tech, think about what happens in a classroom, which is natural, especially if we've got kids in the system. You want to know what's going on between your kid and the teacher. A lot of what goes into public dollars financing education systems and private systems is all the stuff that happens outside of the classroom, right? So transportation, if you've got a busing system, the food, if you've got like a program where you're feeding kids, all the sports, all the activities, all that stuff, but even just like planning for when you've got to put a new roof on your buildings, when you need to pave the parking lots outside of the buildings, all that stuff is still a public dollar cost. And technology can help us across a whole system see, okay, you've got these expenses coming up, so maybe stop spending over here so you don't have to take out a big loan to cover that thing over there. You can look at things like what we see in other states. They've adopted what's called, it's a very fun name, a Student Longitudinal Data System. So an SLDS. Don't worry about what the name is.
Okay.
All it really means is across a kid's life, can you track the dollars that the state and other agencies have put into both their educational outcomes, but also just their life outcomes? So let's call a kid Jeff, okay? So Jeff needs the foster service when he's young because his parents passed away, so he goes into a foster care placement. That's not just a foster care placement, that's the legal system. So there's some attorney that's been hired or, at least to do all that. You got judges, you have everything like that. You've got the health and welfare department taking care of that. Sure. You're also they're in Head Start program. That's a combination of federal dollars, state dollars, maybe there's some private money going into that particular place that Jeff goes. Okay. Then they go into a district that has all-day kindergarten. So Jeff's going to go to kindergarten, go through all 12 grades. Maybe he switches districts 3 times across Idaho. So 3 different districts, very different funding across Idaho districts, but you could track that all the time. Then he goes to a community college for a couple of years, and then finally goes to Boise State, graduates. Okay.
Right. So now he's like 20, Jeff's 23, 24.
Yep.
He's gone through a myriad of different programs and different, with different specialties, different departments.
Yep.
And the idea is, I think essentially what you're getting at is like, these people are not all talking to each other and no one system is tracking, okay, we spent this much on legal, we spent this much on foster, we spent this much on the 3 different districts, we spent this much at, CWI, and then we spent this much at BSU. And to get this finished product of Jeff, this person with these public funds, this is how much it cost us. And this was the ROI.
That's right. Because you can connect it then. The last part is you connect it to like your workforce data. And you can say, okay, Jeff at 23 immediately went into the workforce and was getting a job that paid X amount. Idaho started receiving X dollars back to go create more opportunities for more Jeffs later. Or at 23, ended up taking 3 years to get a job, actually started taking in more state and federal services because whatever the outcomes we wanted for Jeff didn't happen. And you can go back at that system and say, was it the foster care placement piece that happened? Was it that none of the advanced opportunity dollars that were available to Jeff were used and was just sitting there as an empty bank account that we put money in as Idaho taxpayers, right? Every kid gets a set aside for that. But if a kid's not drawing down from it, then it doesn't matter whether we're setting it aside. And frankly, it may be a waste of money to set some money aside if kids aren't using it.
Oh,
right?
1,000%. And then
let's
it's
go
like,
use it for another purpose.
okay, so we had $4,000 and we spent $0 attempting to get that $4,000 in the hands of the kids that could have used it the most. So because of that, we actually lost opportunity cost by setting aside the $4,000. And now it didn't achieve its stated goal, which was to like, help people find a more flexible education outcome, right?
Yep.
Or, flexible and matched to them. It was like, what if we spent $100? Right, $100 in marketing and getting this into the right hands? What would the ROI be on the back end? I've been doing a lot of work in the, or not a lot of work, but having a lot of conversations in the early childhood literacy programs.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, what is the ROI of this? Because it's so difficult to say, okay, we put this money in when this kid was 4, 5, and 6, and then when they're 26, we don't have as many dollars going to social services for them.
That's right.
Right. But bridging that gap of can we trace it back to the kid not being able to read by 3rd grade and then not really successfully graduating high school. Maybe he or she graduated and maybe they just left, right? Yep. They're over it. And then, you fail to find sufficient employment, all these things. And then at 26,
taking care of a kid who's now a 26-year-old kid is much more expensive than since I was going to kindergarten here in the 90s. Schools have been trying to work with the state on what does all-day kindergarten, what does half-day kindergarten look like? Other than what we can pay for from our district funds, what's the state willing to chip in? Because if you've got a kid who's coming from a family where mom and dad, or maybe just mom, are working all day long, and they're going and staying at a friend's house until mom gets off work, and then they're going to spend some time, she's unlikely to be able to sit down and spend 2 hours a night reading with that kid.
Right.
So if they were able to go for 3 hours a day in the morning and get some literacy instruction in a half-day kindergarten program, is that a better investment for the state to make when that kid is 4 or 5 than paying for them to be on our health system, to maybe being part of an adjudication because they got in trouble with the law at 25 because they were upset with how their life had been going. Maybe they're having to, there's all kinds of costs, and it costs a lot more to take care of a 25-year-old than it does to put a kid in school for 3 hours a day when they're 5. And all of us have our own experience of what it was like to go through school. And so people have that imprint on their head when they think about public policy for education. And that's smart. That's why there's so many people that care about education. That's why it's written into state constitutions to do it. Right. It's something that all of us have taken part of, whether we were in public schools or not. Your tax dollars went to it. Everybody else did.
Right.
But when we think about the outcome, we normally think about like the 24-year-olds we know or the 24-year-old we were. And we don't think about across a whole system of hundreds of thousands of kids, what is not just the average, but what are the different groups of success that we see? What are the different groups that are having a harder time coming through that system? Where can we adjust? Like you said, is it $100 out of that 1,000 gets spent to actually help a kid get into a program? Then they've only got $900 left to spend in the program, but they're using that money and getting accelerated versus not even having the program available to them at all.
Right.
You can make even micro adjustments like that along the way that isn't just hitting that one kid. It's now going to hit every single kid who's coming through that part of the system at that time. So that's a data system that normally a state has to operate. It's not just in the Department of Education because you're talking to all these other agencies.
Oh, you have to get like health and welfare involved.
That's right.
Because they're dealing with foster care and then legal and then everything.
That's right. So you see in some places, the governor has said, hey, we're going to do this across all of these agencies. In some places, it's moved over into a legislative thing because they say, actually, we want the system, even if it's a new governor who doesn't want to do that. We've invested all this. Let's make this. That's why it's called longitudinal. It takes a long time to actually see what the outcome of all those different investments are. But if you don't build that system, you're never going to be able to see the ROI on all of that.
Right. And you'd never be able to, again, I had Bree Derrick, the director of Department of Corrections, in a couple months back. And she was saying it's something like 70 or 80% of those people incarcerated in the state of Idaho can't read at a 3rd grade level. Yeah. Something like, so you have this now, again, correlation, not causation. Yeah. That's fine. So we can't say, hey, for sure, but it doesn't take a lot to understand, hey, how many people with like computer science degrees are incarcerated? How many nuclear welders are incarcerated?
Yep.
Right. I mean, nuclear welding is one of the hottest careers, especially in the trades right now.
Literally hot.
Very hot. I'm trying to get, side note, I'm trying to get a gentleman, a professor from the Department of Material Science from BSU on that deals with like nuclear materials, because they have to get materials that can go up to like 10,000 degrees without melting. And as well as the gal who's the head of the department who doesn't work in nuclear, but it's like, listen, every single thing we're doing in the world interacting with is material science. And that's a representation of education. When we talk about, when it's not we, but when people talk about defunding higher education or like what's college good for, it's like, do you like your iPhone?
Yeah.
Do I like the coffee cup that I'm using? Like, do I like the tires on my car? Like, this is all material science. And where do you think this is happening?
Yeah.
Like, they're just not throwing things against a wall at the factory being like, well, just add a little bit more of that stuff. Or there's like, there's a room somewhere where really smart people have committed their lives to understanding material science. And then they can make these things that we then get to utilize in all of our consumable products that we rely on.
And the research that comes out of there is transmitted to all the businesses who are making decisions on headcount, on long-term investments, on whether to take out that loan. In the case of a small business, maybe a second mortgage on your house to try to see if it's worth it to go do that work. And from a small business up to, a Micron is still looking at the same research to say, hey, how do we think about long-term for our business? Because it may not make sense for us. It's never going to make sense for a small business to pay somebody to plan out the next 20 years of what something looks like. The cost benefit isn't there. That's why we've entrusted public dollars historically to institutions who can do that for all of us. So whether it's because we're going to invent the next iPhone, or we want to figure out whether it makes sense to hire 2 more people to work with me the next couple of years, and every single decision in between, businesses have looked to that type of research to do that. Back to what we were saying about that though too, is if you look and see that, okay, we actually have some mines in Idaho that we're going to be able to contribute to some of these rare earths that everybody needs, right? We've got to start figuring out where along our system we train kids, we adjust the system, we change some dollars around to help it make it more possible and plausible that kids from Idaho go into those types of programs. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get a 4-year degree. It may mean that they get the training and knowledge to go out and work one of the vehicles that's going to be operating on that mine, right? Which takes a whole lot of training. It's just not delivered in a classroom necessarily like we think of education. But we need to start thinking about those programs, because if we don't do it, not only are other states going to think about it, but the rest of the world is already ahead of us on a lot of this. So the fact that we don't have one of those data systems here, I think is something, it's not political. It's literally, let's just see how much money we're putting in different buckets, where we actually seeing kids have good outcomes from that. And it hopefully costs less money if we do it more efficiently and effectively, but it also gets more of our kids feeling like they had a successful experience, which then everybody who knows that kid feels better about the system they're paying into. So then we just have a much better cycle of people feeling good about where the money's going. Right.
And again, that's absolutely crucial that we present an ROI to people. The value proposition has to be apparent for taxpayers, and it can't be, this is a public good. Right? Like, okay, yeah, it's a public good. Do you want the U.S. military to stay in operation? Because if you do, just be aware that all of the munitions need antimony. Where's antimony found? Besides China and Russia, it's found in Idaho, in the Stegnight mine, right? I actually have the gal from Perpetua, Mackenzie Lyon, I believe, that's going to come in and talk about it. But you're absolutely right. Like, these are things that we're going to need to figure out. And by the way, antimony is not, I don't think it's found in any other state in the United States. So if Idaho doesn't figure out how to supply some reasonable workforce to start, responsibly, in an environmentally conscientious manner, harvesting this thing for the defense of the United States, what are we going to do? Like, we already have our international adversaries starting to choke off the supply. What do you want to do? You want bullets?
Yeah.
I like bullets. Well, I mean, for a very specific
when
reasons.
They're needed. And I'd much rather have the people who are part of that procurement be, one, Idahoans who were raised here, went to school here, that we invested in with our taxpayer dollars. Because part of the idea of a public good is that people think it's good. And if you can't justify that the money you're putting into something is actually leading to a good, then you can't call it a public good anymore. And I think in some of these things that maybe folks took for granted back in the day, or we didn't have as much information thrown at us, so we just kind of lived our lives. We do need to be more transparent and visible in how much the education system is doing to help kids. The work that I'm doing right now. So I was a teacher. My mom was my music teacher. My dad was my principal. We talked about that a little bit last time. I went into teaching in New York when I started, and then I worked at colleges, worked at universities, did all this stuff that was mostly classroom focused. The place I work now does a lot of cybersecurity for schools. There's a lot of like data backhaul, right? There's all of this stuff we ask school systems to do that those same public tax dollars are now in charge of investing in. I was just up outside of Ferdinand this weekend. My grandmother went to school in a one-room schoolhouse. Her mother taught her and her brother. And there were like 8 kids from all the like little homesteads that went to this school. Right. It's now like the barn on my family homestead, right? So like the barn that my parents' 48 Mercury that we still keep around was in that barn at some point, but it was a schoolhouse. Yeah. What did that schoolhouse have to do? 8 kids walked in the door, and my great-grandmother had to figure out how to teach them all something at a little bit different grade level. But did she even think about grade levels? No. She had 8 kids. They were half of them she was related to. Sure. And they all went down to Ferdinand High School after they were done. And then they all pretty much went back into farming. That is a very different system than when the schoolhouse doors that we're asking kids to walk into today, and that we're asking families to trust to let their kids walk into every single day. Right. And we haven't done a lot of work to help parents and families understand all the work that goes into helping that kid stay safe, helping that kid stay from getting bullied by somebody else, helping them stay fed, giving them activities outside of just academic stuff, because we've all learned that if you're just doing academic work, you're not going to come out like that well societally developed, because you're going to know a whole lot, but you're not going to know how to talk to anybody else about it.
Right.
And you know, when I go travel for work somewhere, I'm able to see every time somebody goes by my front door, because my Ring camera is telling me that. I know when Amazon may be delayed a couple hours. USPS is sending me an email every morning saying, here's the exact pieces of mail you should expect to be able to see, right? I get all this information over the course of my day. I can change the temperature in my house from afar. I can turn on different lights and set up things, right? People have things where they let their dog out remotely and they do all this stuff. We still send our kids into a school building and have no idea what's happening for 7 hours until they come back out. And especially if we're going to ask folks to put their cell phones outside, which there's a lot of public support for cell phones being banned. There was a lot of public support for pagers being banned when they came out in the 90s. Right after Columbine happened, public support for pagers in schools, which were now turning into cell phones, went through the roof because parents wanted to know if their kids were safe. And so we've got to find some happy medium. If we're going to ask people to put a cell phone in a Yonder pouch or something like that at the door, and we're going to keep kids for 7 hours a day, we've got to come up with better ways for parents and families and the taxpayer to know what's going on in those systems. Some of that is like, how do we think about like, what's the Ring camera for a school building? What are the ways that teachers, without putting a bunch more work on them, can communicate with families about, here's the stuff your kid's been learning, not in a once or twice a year teacher conference, but in the daily, here's the stuff that's going on. Here's the applications that they're getting into, and here's the ones that they're not. Here are the things we've put in place to try to keep kids from getting off the bad stuff on the internet and more focused on the academic content.
Let me ask you this. The SAT prep program that I ran initially was just one-on-one, right? So at the end of every class, 90-minute class, I'd go talk to the parents for 5 minutes. This is what we did today, blah, 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 and then I left. And I was very hesitant to move away from that model because the interfacing I had with the parents was so significant. They always got their questions answered. They always felt like there was value. They could hear me interacting with the kid. Great. And I always said, like, look, if they send their kid to a classroom, I'll lose all of that interaction. When I eventually opened up a classroom, I was correct. There was no, interfacing with parents unless they came up, which was rare. And I had another class coming in. But I started sending out emails every single class where it's like, this is what we did today. I would add in a little chunk. So it was essentially like a weekly report card. Every class that went through, it's like, okay, I'd, make sure that parents knew exactly what was going on.
Yeah.
That interaction, parents... First off, there was an open line of communication instantaneously. So if there was a question, I was already proactively reaching out to them. So they could just reply immediately. It's not like they had to go write an email out.
And just even that lets the parent know that you're welcome to that feedback.
Yeah.
Right? That you've started the line of communication, that this is how we do things here. This isn't just you give me your kid and then we never talk to each other. If you want to, you can come back and talk to me.
However, I will say the number of times I had a parent threatened to sue me, 0. The number of times I had a parent livid about a grade, 0.
Yeah.
Now, because I'm not administering grades. Now, if somebody was like, hey man, my kid got a score that we were not anticipating, high, low, whatever, I could make that right really quickly.
Yep.
But it's not like Like they're not calling me like I want a better grade, right? So you have, for instance, within the teachers union, somebody was telling me recently that they actually have essentially like legal insurance that represents teachers when parents lose their mind. So you got to have that balance, right? I was able to have that open communication because it was not mandatory. That there was no mandatory education for SAT prep, and I wasn't withholding anything. It's not like I was in charge of the grade, and we could.
And it was a very specific service. That you were providing
and
to.
it's like, listen, man, this is a different thing. So how do you, and I was only dealing with like at most in a given week, I would see, if I had a crazy week, I'd see like 80 kids and I'd see them once. Right. So it's like, when you're dealing with teachers that are seeing 80 kids a day, that's how do you do that?
That's where we go back to what can technology do to help that? There's folks who are worried that technology is going to come in and take jobs. One, we have never been able to hire enough teachers for the places that we need them to go and the subjects that we need them to teach in Idaho or any other place.
For the pay that we're offering.
Right. And so it may be okay that at some point there's some technological tools that help us reduce the number of teachers we have to hire so that we can hire the very best, pay them more, and have fewer of them, and they can reach more kids. I don't think we're there yet. Where we are we have tools that can look over what schools are doing, what individual classrooms are doing. You're going to have some parents who want to know every single bit of detail.
Sure.
Right? Especially maybe not even all year. Maybe there's something really happening with their kid this month, and that's going to need more support right there. There's other families who are going to be amazed that the school system is even able to tell them some stuff that's going on about their kid, not when they're in trouble.
Right.
And just that level of interaction.
Not when they're in trouble.
Right.
That's a great point.
That's when you hear from schools, right? So many families, the only time that they may hear from a school is when their kid got in trouble.
Right.
We have to change that to say almost every single day, your kid showed up, had an awesome day, maybe had a little bit of trouble with this one little thing, but here are the 5 things they were learning across their day. They went to a sports practice. A system can do that without asking a teacher to. And you can aggregate that across. So for the parents who just want to know what's happening at school for all the kids, there's one level of interaction. For people who want to know what's happening in their classroom, they can dive down a little deeper. Down to their kid, even more so. Not every single family does that. If you're a business, you have some customers who come in and buy one thing once a year, and you have some customers who come in and buy 100 things every single day. You end up building systems that give the information to that multi-day, 100 thing a day person. You give them a lot more information because they need it because of the nature of the transaction. We have to differentiate that for all the families that are coming into the system too.
Do you think that increases or decreases trust? Right? Because you don't have trust, like all the monitoring devices for teenagers, right? Yep. If you have a teenager, is it better to monitor their phone and try to get as much data on your kid and their interactions as possible? Or is it better for you and the kid if you're like, actually, I'm not going to do that because I have to create a relationship where like there's an inherent level of trust? Because monitoring everything means there's no trust.
Yeah.
Right? Like I don't trust my house. That's why we have Ring cameras.
Yeah. So I think there's 2 things there. I think fundamentally, going back to education being a public good funded by taxpayers, it is not just a relationship that we're building between families. And there are a lot of folks investing in that system that are never going to get that family information from a school district because they don't have kids in the system. So to some extent, we need to build things like this data system that we were talking about earlier, like better communication for schools to be able to tell a community what's going on, not about each individual kid and the good and bad things that happened there, but here's how much we spent on this thing. Here's some of the difficulties that we're having. Unless you go to a board meeting, you don't know any of those things a lot of times. Right. And we don't have public newspapers that are like sending out the minutes of stuff anyway, like that too. And so I think at the systems level, we do need more transparency so that whether it's a parent or whether it's somebody who just doesn't really know what's going on at school and can't believe they have to go vote on another bond to pay for X more things, we need to help all those folks know why they are investing in this thing. And so transparency there. And I think that actually does build trust, because if you're not putting information out there, it breeds a lack of trust, because why aren't they telling me this thing? Why are they not saying anything? They must be doing something nefarious, right?
Plus it's fertile earth for misunderstanding.
That's right. That's right. At the parent level, I think we probably need to build a system that allows parents and families the amount of engagement they want. For those parents who trust the system, their kids making it their way through pretty well, the school's happy with where things are, the kids happy with where things are, the fact that that system exists in case you need to call up on it. You want a 911 system, not so you can call it every single day.
Right.
So it's there when you need it when there's a problem, right? That's probably the majority of folks in the system. But what we hear right now, and a lot of the turmoil in school boards and a lot of the stuff that I see coming out of the state legislature, it's built on one moment of misunderstanding or lack of trust. One picture of a certain symbol that somebody didn't like, not hundreds of things in every single Idaho classroom, one time.
Right.
And that turns into legislation that then turns into things that school districts around the state are having to deal with.
Are you talking about the flag bill?
I don't know what I might be talking about.
I don't.
There's lots of that, right?
Yeah.
There's lots of things where somebody has an interaction with the system, and that's not just in the school system. That happens across government agencies. You have to have a system that can respond to that person too, and not blow them off. Not say, hey, trust us. We're the professionals. Say, hey, we hear you. We're going to try to do a little bit better. Folks are doing a lot of that coming out of election integrity right now. The folks I think that are doing it right. Whether the concerns about election integrity are completely valid and fact-based or not. You can either choose to say, you're wrong. Everybody who votes voted legally and we've got documentation, just trust us. And what happens when you do that? There's 17 more Amazon Prime documentaries about voter fraud, and then everybody spins it up. Or you say, come in, take a look at the records. Does every single person in that precinct go in and look at those records? No, they don't care for the most part. But for those one or two people who can spin up something that if that person doesn't take care of it at a local level, it turns into something that the entire state, and in some cases, the entire country is dealing with. Yeah, and I think that's why we need a system where it works for pretty much everybody, which is frankly where we are with public education in Idaho right now. The number two thing people wanted to spend money on in Idaho when Boise State asked their public policy survey, behind housing costs, they want to invest in public education, specifically teacher salaries. A quarter of people said that was the most important thing that the state should do with tax dollars. 1 out of 4. And public education was like the second highest thing overall that folks thought the state should focus on. Not changing it because it's too woke or because it's too conservative or whatever. No, we want our system to be able to have kids that can go out and get those jobs, whether it's working in a mine, whether it's working at Micron, whether it's building the houses that we need because we need a lot more of them. Yeah. Most people actually said, hey, the system we've got works. It just needs more funding. Now, you can debate that they may not have enough information to know whether they need more funding, which is why I want to go back to building a system that shows us how much money we're putting into those kids. So we can say, maybe we don't need more funding across the board, but maybe we do need a little bit here. Or maybe we stop spending over here and put it into this thing that actually is having way better outcomes for kids.
Yeah, again, it makes it. I think most people recognize the need for an educated populace, not just, value in the abstract, but value in like the more educated people are, the more trained they are, the more competent they are, the less we will have to take care of them. So this really becomes an issue of financial responsibility, right? Like if we really want to be financially responsible, we can just deal with higher incarceration numbers and greater social services. Sure, we can do that. And we can say like, we're going to grind those numbers out. We're going to pay you less, we're going to make the safety net less safe than it was before. Or we could also figure out, okay, great, we could do that. How do we get fewer people landing in this thing in the first place?
That's right.
Right. And that comes from creating a system like adult education. I used to always wonder, like, why would people go to like adult education? Like as a teenager, I'm like, I don't understand what adult education is. It's like, well, it's people that are insufficient at what they don't have enough to offer the world in exchange for money. I have some family members that were living in Mexico. They came over to the United States when I was in my early 20s. Excuse me. And they actually had citizenship per my grandfather, who was a U.S. citizen, and he did have at a period of time he went like back to Mexico, I believe, and had some kids. Anyway, he had like 3 different families. Like I'm not 100% sure, like what was what.
Yeah,
he's a great guy. But anyway, the point is that one of them came up and was going to, I think it was like Alaska Airlines had a program that they're like, hey, we need more of this type of person, right? Be it computer-based or something or other, whatnot. And my family member was like, okay, great. I'll go through like that training program, and went through the training program and ended up landing a job. I think his out of the blocks job was like $100,000. Now, somebody coming from Mexico, right? Without, and I'm not 100% sure on all his education level beforehand, but I do know that it was on the weight of him going through this training program. It was like, okay, great. Now I have something to offer.
That's right.
It took a little bit of time. It took some investment from either the company or the community, whatever it was. I did these things. Now we're off and running. And not only am I not being taken care of by social services, and he wasn't in the interim either because my family was helping him. But the point is he's contributing. He's paying taxes. He's shopping at the grocery store. His kids are going to school, like he got married, like all of these things.
The more we can do that funded by the efficient dollars of the Idaho taxpayer, which means everybody's contributing a little bit instead of some people contributing a lot.
Right.
You end up having better competition. You have more businesses being able to get started and being here. Right now, you've had a bunch of episodes dedicated to medical education.
Yes.
And so we've got 2 major health systems in this valley, right? And across the board, in most cases, they are spending more of their dollars, which again are our dollars still, whether it's coming through publicly funded health systems or privately funded health systems, it's still our bucks that are going to St. Alice and St. Luke's.
Right.
They're having to turn around and train people. They're having to turn around and recruit people to come from out of state because they can't find them here.
Yes.
They're having to figure out how to build facilities that can deal with that and enough room to also have the training facilities as part of that, right? Idaho has not chosen to invest in a medical school. Idaho has chosen to spend less per capita on recruiting and attracting healthcare workers. And we've done a lot of things to say, if you come here, you might get sued if you're a healthcare worker. That's not the case in most other places in the country. And so if you're going to make a choice between a place that you're reliant on one employer to provide your training,
right,
and you could get sued in the process, or you come to a place where for years before you and years after, the government agencies that work around you and the taxpayers of that place have said, we're going to invest in this because we think this particular field is important. Independent of what St. Luke's and St. Al's do, then maybe you have other health systems coming in and saying, hey, look at that Treasure Valley that's grown like crazy all the way since the 90s.
Right.
Maybe we should come in there and actually have that. And does that create some competition? Does it create better care? Does it make those 2 existing places that have taken care of Idahoans for a long time a little bit, they can focus on actually providing healthcare and not figuring out how to recruit people to do it? I think we have sometimes too much of a thing where we say, well, business should be able to train those people from Alaska Airlines. That's a very specific thing. But then you only have businesses that are stable enough with enough revenue to be able to go out and do that training stuff that actually can exist in a place like Idaho. If you don't have some kind of public-private partnership where there is a public dollar going in to either match that and create competition, you're reliant on a few businesses that are big enough, strong enough, sometimes bullying enough and then you only have a couple options of where to work. Right. And as an individual who wants to be able to make as much as I can for the value that I have to offer, I want 20 people knocking my door down, asking me to work for them, not the 2 people who have enough money to create the program. And so I think we can't just rely on businesses who are doing it here in Idaho for us. We have to find out where we can match them, whether that's in medical education, whether that's in mineral sciences, whether that's in K-12 education. Right now we're saying, okay, we'll give private money to people. Again, you could still take those private dollars, which to my knowledge is still the only money we're willing to give people without any accountability that I've seen.
Yeah, right.
You could still
No, you have to provide a receipt. They don't know what it's a receipt for, but you do have to provide the receipt.
Yes. And that system at its best, it could still be tied into what we're talking about here with this longitudinal data system that says, hey, this taxpayer got the $5,000 from that program. Call it choice, call it vouchers.
Right.
But at least you could tie it into that and say, okay, families who took advantage, if it is true that 75% of families who took advantage of this tax credit that's going to come out ended up, if we could see over 5 years' time, that they were actually doing better than families from the exact same tax level that didn't take advantage of it, then maybe there's something to looking at what that tax credit system does. Because if you're getting a better outcome, I can't stand here as somebody who's not really approving of those dollars going out to who knows what. But if we have a data system that shows us that it's working for a significant percentage of kids compared to kids who look just like them, then there probably is something that we should look at that from a public policy perspective to say, hey, it may not work for us individually, but across the state, it actually is creating a better outcome.
Right. And the people doing it, if a study came out, they're like, hey, look, man.
That's right.
The people that are going down your route, just so you know, we just did a 5-year study. their kids aren't better off. I'd be like, whoa,
That's right.
Whoa, hang on a sec now. What do you mean? And they're like, yeah, man, like these are the results. We saw no increase in, graduation rates. We saw no increase in testing, all of these things. So like, just so you know, you're not actually barking up, and people could then make their decision based on whatever they want. They're like, okay, well, I still like this educational system because it teaches, my chosen morality, right? Or it has my different value sets, or it shares my love for community service, right? I had a gal from One Stone on recently, and like, they're very community service oriented. It's like, wonderful.
Yeah.
That's great. And you could have your student go there. Side note, this is pretty wild. I won't tell. I'll tell you off air.
No. I think the other piece you were talking about.
Hang on, everybody. That's pretty crazy, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
it'll come out soon enough.
I think the other reason why I've been more and more interested in trying to create different ways for the public to have trust in the school system is there are a number of families who are always going to want to educate their own kids. Yeah. And they can make it work financially to have one or both parents not having to be at a job that doesn't allow them to educate their kids. Right. Because most homeschool families that I know of have at least one adult family member, may not even be the actual parents. Maybe they've got a grandmother that lives with them, or there's a sister who's doing it for 3 sets of families, right?
Yeah. One-on-one education. People are always like, homeschooling is way better. It's like, well, if you could hire a full-time teacher to just focus on little Johnny, yeah, that sounds superior to being in a class with 20 kids, but like, it's not.
We have that option available to people who want to do it. If we continue down a road where more and more folks are not sending their kids to schools because they don't trust the system, or they don't like what's going on in the system, or they don't have any way to know whether that system is going to produce results for their kid, you're taking more and more adults out of the workforce to teach kids. And so, yes, a big part of the public value that we talk about public education is that kids are going to get a great outcome. But another part of why we chose to do it this way is because all the rest of the adults that don't work in the education system can go do other work, whether that's on the farm, whether that's in a mine, whether that's over at Micron, who needs a lot more people to start working there pretty soon. If we have people who are making the choice to educate their kids, not because of the morality choices they may want to make, but because they don't think the system that is available to them can do a good enough job for their kids, we're not only harming that kid, because if they believe that to be true about their kid, the system is not good enough for their kid.
Right.
And we're also keeping their adults in their household from being able to make an income, make a better life for that kid, for that family, and for all of us as taxpayers. Because if they're making more, then we're getting more and we're all better off. Right. So there is a increasing percentage of folks who are saying it's still not very big. It's still not very big. But there's a big difference between 95% of folks saying this is a system good enough to send my kid to, and 90%. Because a lot of the things that come out of opportunities of scaled industries, of scaled services, is when you get to a certain tipping point. Just like immunization, right? Like if you've got 75% of people immunized for something, it doesn't really matter because it can still scatter around there. You've got to get up to a certain amount where it actually makes sense and you create herd immunity. It's the same thing with a lot of public systems. If you have just a few more people opting out, it costs more. It costs way more per kid because some of those efficiencies that you're able to build to start falling away after you do that. It was just like that in sports. If everybody hated football in my hometown, we couldn't field a football team.
Right.
And it wasn't everybody. It was, we played 8-man football. You needed 8 kids to think that it was okay to play football, right? Which probably meant you needed more like 11 because 3 were going to break their leg, right? And so, but that means that instead, all you're talking about is getting 11 kids to say yes. And if 10 or 9 or 8 start saying yes, you can't field a football team anymore. Right. So it's not a matter of everybody or nobody. It's a matter of those margins between the people who are saying yes to things and those who are saying, no, that's not good enough for me. And that's to your question about like, how do we think about the system? I'm not worried as much about the families who have enough income to take care of their kids and provide literacy instruction outside of school. I'm not worried about the people who think that the system is great. We should be still giving them information to back up their belief in us that the system is great.
Sure.
But we have to go find those folks who are questioning whether it's worth it.
Right.
And meet them where they are and not tell them to trust us and not tell them to not show up to the school board meeting but also not give them all the time and attention such that we change everything just to meet their needs. We have to show them how we're doing this for all kids and how they can be part of that, and not just create legislation or change policy because one person's upset. We still have to meet them where they are, but show them where we're doing things for a ton of kids, not just their kid. And right now, I don't think we have the data systems across the state. We don't have policies in place to help schools do that. Instead, we're asking schools to meet some demands of a single individual who got mad at something. And now, like the charter school board I'm on, we're spending time on policies coming from the state that had to do with one single incident in one school district and not things that are going to impact all kids at all districts.
Man, that makes a lot of sense. Look, let's do this. We've been at this for like 45 minutes.
Yeah.
So student longitudinal data set.
Yep.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I have some other questions about different programs, but let's do this. Let's just cut it for now.
Yeah.
And then let's revisit that stuff in a couple months if you're game with it. Because again, if people have made it to 45 minutes, God bless you. I don't want to like push them too hard here. Is there anything you'd like to say kind of here at the end about the student longitudinal data set?
Yeah. People can just look that up. You can put it in your LLM. If you're still using Google, you can put it in Google too. You know, Alabama is one of the states that just did this. They moved it into legislation to say, hey, we want to know what our kids are doing over time. Alabama is pretty politically similar to Idaho. And so it's not something
they're not,
right.
You know,
it's
like
not
some
something
deep blue state.
That's right. And it's about making sure that every single kid has a really good opportunity. It's not saying these groups are bad or these groups are good, and so we're going to do something. It's saying, hey, we're putting a lot of money into this system, not just K-12, but also higher education, adult education, the foster services that Idaho has put a ton of work into. We should know both as a taxpayer and as a policymaker what's working there and what's not.
Well, and it's kind of, again, back to the idea of what you're doing. This is kind of rooted in fiscal responsibility, right? It's kind of like, look, if I wanted to get some result with my weight, say I wanted to bulk up in muscle, or I wanted to shred fat, or I wanted to do whatever I wanted to do, it's literally at this point, I'm eating a bunch of different things from a bunch of different sources with varying dollar amounts. And there's no diary of like, okay, I got this much from this and this much from this. And then there's not a big scrutiny and correlation to like, okay, and he did all of these things, and this is what happened at the end of the day, at the end of the week, at the end of the month.
Yeah.
Right. If you want to lose weight, or if you want to gain weight, or if you want to do whatever you want, you break it down to every single input that you're getting and factor in all these things with a strong correlation. You keep things steady for a while. You're like, okay, I ate nothing but grapefruit every day for like 3 weeks.
Yep.
What happened?
Yeah.
Right. And then we have, okay, this, we can say with high probability, this caused this outcome.
That's right.
And that allows us on like not, a diet standpoint, but from a lifetime standpoint, okay, we've broken all of these things down. Now we have the information about what the health of the person's professional or education capacity is at the end of this amount of time. And this is where it costs money. It actually appears this thing is irrelevant. I thought the coffee was making me gain a bunch of weight.
That's right.
Coffee's actually irrelevant.
And you can make small changes along the way that impact a ton of kids at a time. I hear a lot of people in Idaho say, hey, we're still pretty good at education. Like there are a small number of folks who say Idaho education sucks. I'm not going to listen to them because the data doesn't show that. We spend a very little amount per kid in this state in the public education system. And according to the assessment results we have, we're somewhere in the middle of the country. And a lot of people will say that is an awesome use of taxpayer dollars. If we can spend very little and get somewhere in the middle, I feel really good about that. I don't want to be in the middle. I want us to be number one.
You know what's amazing? We are actually, Idaho, when you think higher education, you don't think Idaho. Idaho is actually number 11th per U.S. News in the entire country for higher education. That's wild. And that includes, like CWI courses.
Yep.
For overall education, we're 18th. We're not even we're in the top third, right? Roughly. It's like, dude, we are doing a really, really good job with the dollar spent because we're at the lowest for our dollars.
That's right.
Right? Like I think we even spend less per capita than like Guam or something. Like
Yep.
I'm not 100% sure, but those are the types of things where you're like, okay, articulate how we are failing. Right. And if the idea is, okay, you have 65% proficiency in, this particular subject. Okay. Who has better than 65% proficiency?
Yep.
Which state? Point to the state. Because what people come to realizing at a large scale, it's like, oh, nobody's really above like 65%.
Yeah.
Maybe there's somebody at like 67%, but there's always a portion of at-risk youth. There are a portion of, we have higher divorce rates. We have all of these different problems. So you could just say, hey, we are not at, if 65% proficiency, that would be a D. That's a terrible grade. Yeah, man. But like 65% proficiency actually above average, scale, right? Yeah, that's not reality. Yeah. Nobody's at 100%. Nobody's at 90%. Right?
And you'll have other people say we should spend twice as much per kid. What I'm saying is, we don't know. We don't know how much more we would need to spend to see an increase on X outcome. And until we build a system that doesn't just work within education, but also looks at the legal system, looks at the healthcare system, looks at the labor and workforce, if you tie all those together and say, did the investment we promised and that we are constitutionally obligated to give to kids here, are we fulfilling that promise, not just at the bare minimum with the bare amount of dollars, even if we get a decent outcome? And I don't think we need to double it either. Let's build a system that lets us look and say, for just this little amount right here, maybe it is early childhood literacy. Maybe it's more career technical education and partnering with businesses in high school. There could be a ton of different opportunities we see when we actually look at the data across the state, not just for one kid, not just for one district, not looking at a huge district like West Ada or a tiny district like where I grew up in Council, but across the state, where are investments the state can make to get us from 18th to number 1, to get us from number 11 in higher ed to number 1, and we're not going to have to spend double to get there. It could be a couple small tweaks here and there that allow us to give every kid in Idaho the best opportunity for what they do next, not as good as some other places around us.
Got it. Jeff, I appreciate you. Thank you for coming in. Let's do this again.
Sounds good.